Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. This lesson is based on Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney, so please make sure you've got a copy of this poem in front of you, a pen and a highlighter would also be useful. If you don't have your anthology at home, don't worry, you'll be able to download a copy of the poem from the resources attached to the assignment. Firstly, I'd like you to use your imagination. So imagine waking up at a house you're staying in, looking out the window and being confronted by this storm hitting the island. I'd like you to try and write a couple of really detailed and descriptive paragraphs about this scene that's in front of you. Make sure you use a range of sentence structures, so let's have some simple, compound and complex sentences being used, and also a range of language devices for effect. If you struggle to get going, there is a sample paragraph on the screen for you, which should give you some inspiration. Now let's bullet point some information about the poet Seamus Heaney. Now Seamus Heaney was born in 1939 in Northern Ireland and died in 2013. He had an upbringing in the countryside. His father was a farmer and cattle dealer, and you'll see that much of his poetry is based around the countryside and the farming life that he knew. He writes about our relationship with nature and also our vulnerability in the face of its destructive power. He was considered to be one of the 20th century's most important poets and actually was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. If we look at the title, Storm on the Island, rather than a storm or the storm, that suggests to us that he's not writing about one particular storm, but about power in general. So when we take a close look at that title, Storm on the Island, you'll notice that the first 8 letters spell out Stormont, and Stormont is the name of the Parliament buildings in Belfast. So we could interpret this poem as being an extended metaphor for the Troubles in Ireland. The Troubles in Ireland could well be argued to have started over 800 years ago, but in front of you have some more recent context that I'd like you to bullet point information from. Now have a read through the poem. Pause the video to allow yourself time to do that, and when you feel ready, press play and we'll go through the literal meaning. So let's take a look at those first couple of lines. Here we have the speaker making a very bold, confident statement to say that they're prepared, they've built their houses, they're short, they're wide, they're able to withstand. And then he goes on to the next section where he talks about the wizened earth. Now, wizened earth is earth of a poor quality, it's very dry, it's very shriveled up, so it's not suitable for farming, so they're not growing any crops, so they're not going to lose any crops. And he also talks about there being a lack of trees as well. So if you think about how when there's a storm, you hear those powerful winds and you hear the wind moving through the trees. They're noises that would normally accompany a storm, but there aren't any. So there's no company, there's no noises which we would normally associate with those storms. And in this section, a real sense that their confidence is starting to slip away. Reference again to the fact that there aren't any trees, there is no natural shelter, and that you might think the sea would be a comfort to them, but the sea, which was once comforting, has now turned into something quite vicious. And in this last section, we have a more fearful tone and a reflective tone as well, really telling to us that actually there's not a great deal they can do other than just sit patiently and wait for this storm, which now feels like it's attacking them, to pass. And there's a lovely reflection on that last line with it's a huge nothing that we fear, really referencing how strange the situation is when you stop and think about it, because actually it's the wind, it's air that they're fearful of. Just to quickly recap before we move on, the speaker is describing how well he feels his community is prepared for the storm, but as the poem goes on, their confidence starts to slip away. We hear more about the sounds and the power of the storm, and by the end of the poem, he's describing the fear that they're feeling as the storm is hitting the island. bullet points some information about key themes and ideas. So you'll probably have already noticed that as we were reading through the poem, you saw images of safety change to that of danger. Man is also presented as insignificant compared to the natural world, and the poem encourages us to question the source of our fear. Is it actually the unknown that frightens us the most? And also acts as a reminder of human vulnerability. Now let's make some notes about the structure of this poem. So it's 19 lines long, one long blank verse with long and complex sentences. So it really follows the natural patterns of spoken language. And when you couple that with the direct address that's being used, it really feels like Heaney is speaking to us directly. Now this poem adheres to some of the conventions of a dramatic monologue. We're hearing from Heaney as if he is an islander himself, and he's presenting this to us as if it's a social experience or a historical experience. And I think if we combine that with the use of the everyday language, you know what I mean, we can see that this experience is nothing unusual to the islanders. You know what I mean, referring to something which has happened before. So I think we can see that living through conflict, living through an attack is actually something which they are used to in their everyday life. Now I'd like you to explore the poem and highlight the use of enjambment. I'd like you to pause the video to give yourself time to do this and also to think about what that could suggest about the storm, particularly if you combine it with the fact that this is one long verse. So pause the video now to give yourself time and then press play again when you're ready. Perhaps you've come up with something along the lines of the use of one long verse reflects how overwhelming this experience is for the islanders, and the use of enjambment further highlights how the storm cannot be controlled or contained. Now, the use of direct address helps us feel far more involved as a reader. We feel like it's actually happening to us, so that storm becomes far more threatening. And if we also look at the poet's lack of control around the rhyme and rhythm in this poem, it's very unpredictable, and we can reflect and use that to comment on the unpredictability of the storm itself. Now the poem is in iambic pentameter, so remember that show lines of 10 syllables with alternating stressed and unstressed syllables. Now Heaney has taken this traditional form of English poetry and infused it with his Irish experience through the use of everyday language. And I'd like you to consider how you can use that to reflect on conflict. Now let's take a look at some of the language that's being used. I'd firstly like you to focus on "we are prepared" and have a think about what that conveys. Pause the video to give yourself time to gather some thoughts and then press play again when you're ready. So, "we are prepared" is a very bold and confident opening statement. This is our narrator speaking with absolute certainty that the islanders are prepared for this storm. And it's followed up by the use of caesura, and this makes us pause to allow time for that statement to sink in. Further images of safety are highlighted in blue for you. So we have a real sense of security. However, we know that that opening statement is actually quite ironic because eventually the islanders are going to be overwhelmed by the storm. And here we can see the tone and mood of the poem changing. So we're moving away from images of safety to images of danger with blows full, blast, tragic fear and pummels. We've also got direct address here as well with you and your, and this helps us to feel really close to the action. It's like it's actually happening to us. So if you combine that with images of danger, you start to really feel the threat of the storm. And images of danger continue aplenty. Let's take a look at the use of an oxymoron here with exploding comfortably. This really conveying the sense of how violently the sea is behaving, but that it's very happy to do so in its environment. we have the flung spray hit the very windows. Again, flung having connotations of violence, showing how forceful, how powerful the sea is, that it's powerful enough to throw up the spray and actually cause damage to the houses. And the simile, spits like a tame cat turned savage, gives the impression that the storm is wild and uncontrollable. Something that can seem quite innocent, like a tame cat, can actually be very unpredictable and deadly. Now take a look at strafes, salvo and bombarded. Now these are all military terms connected to air attacks. So think about the use of these military metaphors and their effect. Give yourself time to think, pause the video and then press play again when you feel ready. So the use of these military terms really emphasises for us how violent and aggressive the storm is. It's a constant barrage from the sky. And here on the final line, we have the use of juxtaposition with huge nothing. So let's take a moment to think about that huge nothing that we fear. So this is really highlighting for us how strange their situation is. Despite all their huge physical preparations, it is actually only air that they fear, something that can't be seen or touched. So the fact that they've made all their preparations has not been sufficient to conquer their fear of the storm, which makes the storm feel even more threatening to us as the reader. So I hope this lesson has helped you with your understanding of the poem and enabled you to make some good annotations. On the next slide or two, you'll find some tasks. Your teacher might well direct you to specific ones to complete, or if not, you may wish to complete them independently. If in the future you're asked to compare this poem regarding unpleasant and/or powerful experiences, you may wish to compare it to the Prelude, Exposure, London Remains, or Bayonet Charge. If you're asked to compare this poem regarding nature versus the power of humans, you may wish to compare it to the Prelude, Exposure, or Tissue. So on this slide and the next are the tasks. Your teacher might well direct you to complete specific tasks from these slides, or if not, you may wish to complete some of them independently.